Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bakery Live. I'm Joseph, the editor of International Bakery Magazine. And in this exclusive interview, I'm joined by Suraj Patel, who is the UK sales manager for Endoline Robotics. In this session, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges facing the bakery industry at the moment, and more importantly, how these hurdles can be overcome thanks to automation and robotics. So, Raj, thank you for joining us. Could we begin with you giving us a bit of an overview and an introduction to yourself and your career journey to date, and how you ended up in this role and this particular sector?
And thank you for having me. So my name's Suraj Patel, as you said, and I'm the UK sales manager for Endoline Robotics. Now, I worked for Endoline for 3 years, but my career started about 10 years ago when I worked for a company who manufactures check weighers, metal detectors, and X-ray systems. And I was the product and project manager at that company. Did that for about 7 years. And then I decided to transition across to robotics, which is a very exciting and growing industry in the UK at the moment. The UK is kind of a little bit behind at the moment compared to, say, our European neighbors when it comes to robotics and automation, particularly at the end of line. So this is an exciting space. It's growing very quickly as well. I can tell you that much. So give you a little bit of background about Endoline Robotics. I won't get too into it, but it started 5 years ago. So Endoline Robotics is a 5-year-old company, but it has 2 parent companies, which are both 40 years old. One of the companies is based in the UK, Endoline Automation, and they manufacture case erectors and sealers. And then the other parent company is in Greece, and that's called Theodora Group, and they manufacture full end-of-line automation systems. And with end-of-line automation in the UK, solely manufacturing erectors and sealers, they saw a gap in the market that they sold quite easily. End-of-line automation having sort of the wealth of experience and customer base, thought they'd go after it, and it's proven to be quite successful over the last 5 years.
Well, thank you for that introduction. As you said, it is a very exciting topic, and I'm keen to get going with the questions and learn more about it. And to begin, could you tell us what are some of the unique challenges faced by the bakery industry and how robotics and automation can help address these difficulties and these challenges?
So the bakery industry, I think, is a unique sector in its own right when you compare it across the entire sort of food manufacturing sector of the UK market. So bakery, particularly bread, is a very demanding product from a consumer point of view. So I was looking at some statistics, and even though I got some differing opinions based on the sources that I was looking at, the average consumption of bread per person per year ranges between 30 and 60 loaves. So as you can imagine, with the population growing as it is, that number the volume of bread that needs to be manufactured in the UK will need to increase year on year. So it's a very demanding sort of industry, the bakery industry. And the unique challenges are generally driven by the consumer. So it's all consumer led. So you've got the issue with availability. Everybody wants to be able to go to the local supermarket and see the bakery good that they're looking to purchase on the shelves, at any time of day. With some of the supermarkets running 24/7, some people want to turn up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be able to buy their loaf of bread. So availability is a big challenge. So the volume that needs to be produced by manufacturers needs to be high. And then we think about the quality. If I buy a loaf of bread, and I keep using loaf of bread as an example, but it's a good example. If I buy a loaf of bread in the local supermarket down the road, I want the same loaf of bread, the same taste, the same number of slices, the same quality when I'm 100 miles away in 6 months from now. So, consistency is really important. Then you've got the price. Now, as a consumer, you don't want to keep spending more and more. As inflation rises, you want to spend the same amount on bread, whatever it is generally. So that's a big one. That's a big topic at the moment. And then you've got people tend not to think about this, but in the back of their minds, I think people, I know it may or may not, is safety. And that is that they want to be safe when they're eating their food. They don't want to have a loaf of bread with any level of contamination in it. So this is where the consumer drives this automation.
I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that on average we consume, I think you said 30 to 60 loaves of bread per year, because I'm pretty sure in our household they seem to be a lot more. We seem to get through a huge amount of bread. You mentioned the fact that consistency is a challenge, but then through robotics and automation, that is actually one of the benefits, that there can be more consistency in terms of having the same taste in a product, but also the same costs between different stores and around the country. When it comes to another challenge, that's flexibility, which is obviously very important in the bakery sector. What role do you think robotics and automation can play in enhancing, the flexibility?
Sure. So I think if we start with people, generally, people are very flexible. They can think, they can think compared to a robot that needs to be programmed. People have their own, intuition. They can think. They're very unique, and you can't really replace a person when it comes to flexibility, right? But the trouble with people is that they're very slow. So when you talk about product changeovers, that's where automation and flexibility really meet together. So what I'm finding is that a lot of companies these days, a lot of manufacturers aren't just producing one type of product anymore. They're producing a vast variety of products, which means that they need to be very dynamic and flexible in swapping between one type of bakery good compared to the next. So if you've got so many different products that you need to manufacture every single day, the changeover when it comes to people generally is quite high. And the volume that these people are producing is quite low. When you introduce automation, changeovers can be actually a lot quicker, and the volume that they produce in that given time frame is higher as well. So when it comes to flexibility, it's like swings and roundabouts, really. People are more flexible, for sure, but they can't produce as much compared to automation, and they can't change over as fast compared to automation. When it comes to automation, it's better for flexibility overall, even though it's sort of less flexible. You see what I mean?
And when it comes to, obviously, many working in the bakery industry and even in the mass bakery production industry, space can be limited. Do you think that automation and robotic systems fit into these kinds of spaces?
Technology moves on. We're finding that good machinery automation suppliers are able to make these systems smaller and smaller. And as technology advances, things like robots are becoming smaller and smaller, so they can fit into these small confined spaces. Now, with people and using people, an automated system will always use more space than a person. That is a given. But when we think about what that person is able to produce in a given time frame versus what automation can produce in comparison in that same given time frame, you could be looking at up to 10 times the amount that a piece of automation can produce compared to a person. Therefore, the trade-off in space is actually warranted. Although you may end up using 4 times more space than the person, you may be able to produce 10 times as much. And therefore, when you think about volume per space capita, it actually works out better having automation. But if you just think about just the footprint and disregard the volume that is produced, then a person will always use less space. and is always a bit more flexible. But then you start to introduce the volume per capita, and then automation sort of blows it out the water completely. So it's important that it, whoever's manufacturing these automation systems out there does consider the space available in these factories. But I think the factories also need to remember that people will use less space, and therefore they should provision more space for these automation systems, because in the long run it'll actually be more beneficial. Loss of space, sorry, but the increase in production is definitely warranted.
And given the fact that there is also a labour shortage, and that's a significant challenge in the bakery industry, would you say that this is another sort of principal reason why manufacturers and producers should consider implementing robotics and automation into their production?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, all the systems that Endoline have manufactured so far and implemented, the underlying reason for the purchases has always been labor shortages, without question. It's always been the case. I think the reason why we seem to have a lot of labor shortages at the moment, there's several different factors. I mean, doing my research into this and just what I know about the industry and speaking to a lot of these manufacturers, there's a few reasons that always seem to come up. One of them was Brexit, and a lot of the non-UK workers went back to their home countries, ended up staying there because the economies in these home countries started to develop and become stronger. So there was no reason for them to come back to the UK to work. So that was one of the biggest reasons, I think. COVID-19 got people thinking differently. I mean, it got me thinking differently. I left my old business during that time and ended up working for Endoline. So it got me, sitting at home, really thinking about. A lot of people went through the same procedure. They're at home thinking about themselves, what they want to do in the future, and they don't want to work in these sort of difficult, labor-intensive jobs anymore. And then you've got this aging workforce as well, where a lot of the people, like my grandparents, for example, they used to work in this type of industry where it was very labor intensive. And now you've got myself. I'm not working in that industry anymore. I prefer a non-labor intensive job like the one I'm working in now. I think the newer generation aren't so interested in working in these jobs. The older generation was. And then I think you've just got changes in the domestic workforce preference generally. Like I said, people aren't interested in working in these hard labor jobs anymore. And therefore, you've got this issue with recruiting these people into these roles. So now you've got to think about introducing automation and recruiting more upskilled workers to look after these automated systems, which are also higher paid as well. So I think it's a win-win all around, because you're also upskilling, the factory's upskilling the workers. So you've got highly skilled people, and then generally the economy benefits because you've got a lot more upskilled workers just working generally across the UK.
And to touch upon a growing demand and also a concern across all industries, that is sustainability. In what ways do you think that robotics and automation can contribute to sustainability goals, and more specifically in the bakery industry?
This is actually quite a tough question. So there's different ways of looking at this, but if you look at the overall picture, I think robotics has its place in saving sort of energy and increasing sustainability for a lot of these companies, and it comes in various different ways. For example, we introduced the end-of-line automation system in a factory where they were packing by hand, and then we ended up automating their packing process and palletizing process. What that did was it forced them to review their packaging styles, and by automating the process, it forced them to remove a lot of the material, the card material in their cases. So they saved about 50 mil off the top of every single card case that they manufactured. So that was a saving in the raw material. They were then able to produce more, they were able to build pallets with more product because they were able to add a couple of extra layers. They're then putting these pallets into trucks, 10, 12 pallets into trucks. So they're shipping a lot more product. So the carbon footprint per product is reduced because they're shipping more products in a truck, let's say, and then they're doing thousands of these every year. It soon starts to add up. If you think about people as well, people that are driving to the office or to these manufacturing sites, and then they're driving home, and people tend to forget that they're producing emissions as they drive to the office and then they drive back. I think it's a bit of a stretch, sort of thinking about it from that point of view. But I always compare what would be let's say, the carbon footprint of products that you manufacture using people in a given time frame versus using automation, because you can produce so much more product in the same time as you do with people. I think, and I need to confirm this, but I think you would overall have a much lower footprint compared to people, because you're just producing that much more product. You're just producing so much more in a given time frame compared to people. And then therefore, I think even though you're using more energy to produce in that time frame because you're producing more, I guess the footprint of that product is less than what a person would be able to produce.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand the point that you make. We've talked a lot about I think the benefits of using robotics in relation to the challenges that are, being faced in the bakery industry. So I would like to ask your opinion on some of the limitations that you've experienced in your time at Endoline Robotics and how you've overcome these limitations.
One of the biggest limitations is skepticism from people when it comes to automating end of line, sort of areas within businesses. Historically, when you have companies who are manually packing, manually palletizing, and then you transition them to full automation, it is a significant change in these businesses. And there can be a bit of skepticism from people who are working, who are, I guess, not in the management tier, who have made the decisions to accept the new style of packing and palletizing through automation rather than through people. So we've always found that to be a challenge. I guess the way you overcome that is by really closely working with the people that are solely going to be responsible for the systems. And I think businesses, when they're looking at implementing full automation at the end of line, they really need to get the operators involved. When they earmark the people that will be looking after the system and will be responsible for it, they should really think about getting them involved at the very early stages. Really make sure that they understand what's going to happen and what the expectations are, and not really blindside them with, a load of automation that they then need to suddenly, change their ways for. They may have been, doing the manual packing for the last 20 years, and then suddenly they need to change that. It's not an easy process for a lot of people. So very important that you let these people know well in advance. And I think it's a lot easier, the transition.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. As we said at the beginning, it is an incredibly exciting topic, not just in the bakery industry, but in, many industries. This idea of being able to get so much more done in a shorter space of time, thanks to robots. I am intrigued to see how this develops further. So just to finish, what would be your sort of predictions for how we might see this develop over the coming years?
I think the UK generally, not just the bakery industry, but the whole of the food industry, I think over the next sort of 10 years, we will see a massive uptake in robotic automation for sure. We're so behind compared to Europe at the moment. And the UK is screaming for automation. The UK is screaming for end-of-line automation using robotics as well. The UK needs the flexibility, they need the performance, they need the output. Consumer demand is so high in this country that it's almost like we have no choice but to go down this route. And, I'm here for it.
And what would be your sort of advice for those who are watching and might be a bit concerned, or a bit sort of worried to take that leap of faith and enter into this world of automation?
Maybe you need to be comfortable with automation. That's the first thing. If you're not comfortable with automation, then the process in implementing automation will be really tough. And the way to make yourself comfortable is to start to get to know these automation manufacturing businesses. So get to know the businesses, get to know the people that work in the businesses, and make sure that you pick the correct supplier, and just make sure that you're happy with them. Make sure that you can trust them. And I think the journey of implementing automation will then be a lot easier. A lot of companies will get 4 or 5 different suppliers in, and then they may end up picking the cheapest, but the cheapest is not always the best. Sometimes picking a company that you feel will do the best job, even if they're not the cheapest, is the way to go.
Well, thank you very much once again, Suraj. And if anyone has any questions, I'm sure they'll reach out to you personally.
Thank you for your time.